The sun was setting over a quiet suburban neighborhood in Maryland, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns and empty streets. It was supposed to be just another ordinary evening for retired U.S. Army General Marcus Johnson, a man known throughout the community not only for his distinguished military career, but also for his kindness and humility. He had spent decades serving his country, earning medals and accolades that lined the walls of his modest home. But tonight, none of that mattered. General Johnson was driving back from visiting an old friend when he noticed flashing blue and red lights behind him. Confused, he pulled over to the side of the road, wondering what he could have done wrong. The speed limit signs were clear, and he hadn't been speeding. Still, he rolled down his window and waited patiently as the officer approached his car. Officer Daniel Hayes, a young white cop with only 3 years on the force, walked up to the driver's side. His hand rested on the holster of his gun, though it wasn't drawn. "License and registration, please," he said firmly, his voice carrying a tone of authority. General Johnson nodded politely, reaching into the glove compartment to retrieve the documents. As he did so, Hayes' German Shepherd K-9 unit, trained to detect threats, began growling low in its throat. The dog strained against its leash, clearly agitated by something, though no one could say exactly what. "Sir, keep your hands where I can see them," Hayes barked, taking the step back. General Johnson froze, his heart pounding. "I'm just getting my papers," he explained calmly, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. But the dog's behavior only worsened. It lunged forward, barking loudly now, its teeth bared. Hayes tried to regain control, tugging hard on the leash, but the animal broke free. Before anyone could react, the K-9 charged at General Johnson, sinking its teeth into his arm. Shocked and in pain, the general instinctively tried to push the dog away, but the attack continued. Hayes shouted commands, trying desperately to call the dog off, but adrenaline and training had taken over the animal. Within moments, the situation spiraled out of control. Blood soaked through General Johnson's shirt as he collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for air. By the time backup arrived, it was too late. Paramedics rushed to the scene, working frantically to stabilize him, but the injuries were severe. General Johnson was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. News of his death spread quickly, leaving the community stunned. How could such a respected figure meet such a tragic end? For Officer Hayes, the night turned into a nightmare. Questions swirled around why the traffic stop escalated so violently, and whether race played a role in how the situation unfolded. Social media erupted with outrage, videos of the incident circulating widely despite the lack of clarity about what truly happened. Some defended Hayes, saying the dog acted on instinct, while others condemned him for failing to maintain control. As dawn broke over the horizon, the once peaceful neighborhood felt heavy with tension. Neighbors gathered outside, whispering among themselves, unsure of what to believe. For many, this wasn't just about one man's death. It was about years of unresolved grievances, mistrust between communities, and systemic issues that refused to go away. And somewhere amidst all the chaos, a grieving family prepared to bury a husband, a father, and a hero whose life ended far too soon. The days following General Marcus Johnson's death felt like an endless storm, both for his family and the nation at large. News outlets couldn't stop talking about it. His face appeared on every screen, accompanied by headlines that painted him as a symbol of everything wrong with law enforcement today. Protesters took to the streets in cities across America, holding signs that read "Justice for Marcus" and chanting slogans demanding accountability. The story dominated social media feeds, sparking heated debates about race, policing, and systemic inequality. For Maya Johnson, the general's only child, the weight of her loss was unbearable. She had always admired her father, not just because he was a decorated war hero, but because of the way he carried himself with dignity and grace. He taught her to stand up for what was right, even when it was hard. Now, as she sat alone in his study surrounded by photographs, medals, and letters from soldiers whose lives he'd touched. She felt lost. Her father wasn't just gone. He had been taken from her in a way that made no sense. As the initial shock began to wear off, Maya found herself consumed by questions. Why had this happened? What had really gone wrong during that traffic stop? Determined to understand, she requested copies of the police report and bodycam footage. When they finally arrived, she watched them over and over again, searching for answers. But instead of clarity, she found more confusion. In the video, her father seemed calm, almost too calm, given the situation. He followed instructions, kept his hands visible, and never once raised his voice. Yet the dog attacked anyway. Maya also noticed something else. The officer, Daniel Hayes, looked nervous, almost scared. His movements were jerky, his commands inconsistent. It was clear he hadn't been prepared for how quickly things escalated. Still, none of this explained why her father, a man who had dedicated his life to serving others, ended up dead on the side of the road. The lack of answers gnawed at her, fueling her anger and grief. Meanwhile, the public outcry grew louder. Civil rights organizations called for an independent investigation into the incident, accusing local authorities of bias. Politicians weighed in, some using the tragedy to push their agendas, while others remained silent, afraid of saying the wrong thing. Even within the military community, there was outrage. Fellow veterans organized vigils in honor of General Johnson, vowing not to let his death be forgotten. Amidst all the noise, Officer Hayes became a lightning rod for criticism. Some defended him, arguing that he was simply doing his job under difficult circumstances. Others saw him as the embodiment of everything wrong with modern policing, reckless, untrained, and indifferent to human life. For Hayes, the backlash was overwhelming. Death threats poured in daily, forcing him to move out of his home for safety. His department placed him on administrative leave pending an internal review, but many felt that wasn't enough. Back in Maryland, Maya struggled to keep her emotions in check. Friends and relatives urged her to stay strong, reminding her that her father wouldn't want her to give up. But staying strong was easier said than done. Every time she turned on the news or scrolled through her phone, she saw reminders of what she had lost. One evening, while sorting through her father's belongings, she stumbled upon a box tucked away in the corner of his closet. Inside were old letters, faded photographs, and documents she had never seen before. Among them was a handwritten note addressed to her mother, dated years before Maya was born. At first glance, it seemed insignificant, a casual letter between two people reminiscing about the past. But as Maya read further, her heart skipped a beat. The writer mentioned someone named Elijah Carter, referring to him as your husband, and asking about the baby. Confused, Maya reread the words several times, trying to make sense of them. Her father's name wasn't Elijah Carter. It was Marcus Johnson. Who was this man, and why did her mother have letters from him? The discovery left Maya shaken. She had always believed Marcus Johnson was her biological father, the man who raised her and loved her unconditionally. But now, doubts crept in. Was it possible that her family wasn't exactly what she thought it was? And if so, what did that mean for her identity? And for the fight she was preparing to take on in her father's memory? Maya sat on the floor of her father's study, surrounded by the contents of the mysterious box she had found. Her mind raced as she sifted through old letters, photographs, and documents, each one raising more questions than answers. The name Elijah Carter kept appearing, written in neat cursive handwriting that didn't match her father's bold strokes. It was clear this man had been important to her mother at some point. But how? And why had she never mentioned him before? Determined to get to the bottom of things, Maya decided to confront her mother. She called her later that evening, trying to sound casual as she asked if they could talk about something personal. Her mother hesitated but agreed, sensing the seriousness in Maya's voice. When Maya arrived at her mother's house the next day, she brought the box with her, hoping the items inside would jog her memory or force her to come clean. "Mom, I need you to explain this," Maya said, placing the letter addressed to her mother on the kitchen table. Her mother's face went pale as she read it, her hands trembling slightly. For a moment, she said nothing, staring at the words as if seeing them for the first time in decades. Finally, she sighed deeply and motioned for Maya to sit down. "Your father, Marcus, wasn't your biological father," her mother began, her voice soft but steady. "The man who raised you, who loved you with all his heart, wasn't the man who gave you life." She paused, searching for the right words. "Elijah Carter is your biological father." Maya felt like the ground beneath her had shifted. She stared at her mother, struggling to process what she had just heard. All her life, she had believed Marcus Johnson was her father, the man who taught her how to ride a bike, who cheered at her school plays, who hugged her tightly whenever she needed comfort. How could he not be her real father? And why had her mother kept this secret for so long? "I know this must be hard to hear," her mother continued, tears welling up in her eyes. "But you have to understand, we did what we thought was best for you. Elijah and I were young when we met, both starting our careers. He joined the FBI shortly after you were born, and we knew his job would take him away from us often. Marcus, he stepped in when Elijah couldn't. He adopted you legally, gave you his name, and treated you as his own. You were too young to remember any of it." Maya listened silently, her thoughts swirling like a storm. Part of her wanted to scream, to demand answers about why her parents had lied to her for so long. But another part of her understood. Marcus Johnson had given her everything a father could give. He had been there for birthdays, graduations, and milestones. He had loved her without condition. Did biology really matter when it came to defining family? Still, the revelation left her unsettled. If Elijah Carter was her biological father, where was he now? Did he even know about her? These questions burned in her mind, refusing to let her rest. After a long silence, she looked at her mother and asked, "Does he know about me?" Her mother nodded slowly. "Yes, he knows. We told him when you were born, but we lost touch over the years. He's an FBI agent now, stationed in Washington, D.C. I don't know much about his life these days, but I can give you his contact information if you want." Maya hesitated. Meeting the man who had unknowingly contributed half of her DNA felt daunting, especially during such an emotionally charged time. Yet, deep down, she knew she needed answers, not just about her identity, but also about the circumstances surrounding her adoptive father's death. If Elijah Carter was connected to law enforcement, maybe he could help her uncover the truth behind the tragedy that had shattered her world. With a heavy heart, Maya agreed to reach out to him. As she left her mother's house later that evening, clutching a slip of paper with Elijah's phone number scribbled on it, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change forever. The journey ahead promised to be painful, complicated, and full of uncertainty, but she owed it to herself and to the memory of the man who had raised her to see it through. The next morning, Maya sat at her kitchen table, staring at the piece of paper with Elijah Carter's phone number. Her fingers hovered over her phone, hesitating. What would she even say? "Hi, I'm the daughter you never knew about." It sounded ridiculous, even in her head. But the weight of everything, the loss of her father, the unanswered questions about his death, and now this bombshell about her own identity, pushed her to dial the number. Her heart pounded as the phone rang. After 3 rings, a deep voice answered. "Elijah Carter." Hi," Maya stammered, suddenly unsure of herself. "My name is Maya Johnson. I think we might need to talk." There was a long pause on the other end. "Maya," he repeated, his tone shifting from professional to puzzled. "Who gave you this number?" "It's complicated," Maya said, taking a deep breath. "But I think you're my biological father." Another silence followed, heavier this time. Finally, Elijah spoke, his voice softer but still guarded. "This is a lot to process. Can we meet in person? Somewhere private?" They agreed to meet later that afternoon at a quiet cafe near downtown Washington, D.C. As Maya drove there, Her nerves were through the roof. She had no idea what to expect. Would he deny it? Would he be angry? Or worse, would he not care? When she walked into the cafe, she spotted him immediately. Elijah Carter looked like someone who carried authority effortlessly. He was tall, with sharp features and salt and pepper hair, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed professionalism. Yet, when their eyes met, Maya saw something unexpected: vulnerability. "Maya?" he asked, standing up as she approached. Up close, she noticed faint lines around his eyes, evidence of years spent carrying burdens most people couldn't imagine. "Yes, that's me," she replied, sitting down across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt thick with unspoken words. Finally, Elijah broke the silence. "Your mother told you, didn't she?" It wasn't really a question. His tone suggested he already knew the answer. Maya nodded. "She did. And I know this must be shocking for you too, but I needed to know the truth. About my family. About where I come from." Elijah leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "I won't lie. It's a shock. When your mother and I parted ways, I thought I'd never hear from her again. I didn't know she went on to have a child, or rather, that we did." He sighed deeply, looking at Maya with a mix of curiosity and regret. "You look so much like her." For a brief moment, Maya felt a flicker of connection. But then reality came crashing back. This wasn't just about discovering her roots. It was about finding justice for the man who had raised her. Summoning her courage, she explained why she had reached out. "My adoptive father, Marcus Johnson, he died recently. You might have seen it on the news. A police officer's K-9 attacked him during a traffic stop." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed forward. "There are so many unanswered questions about what happened. I don't trust the system to give me answers. But you're FBI. Maybe you can help me figure out the truth." Elijah listened intently, his expression growing darker with each word. When Maya finished, he exhaled sharply. "Marcus Johnson was a good man," he said quietly. "I've heard his name before. In passing, mostly. People respected him. If what you're saying is true, and foul play was involved." He trailed off, shaking his head. "This could get messy." "I don't care how messy it gets," Maya interrupted, her voice firm. "He deserved better than this. I deserve to know what really happened." Elijah studied her for a moment, seeing the determination in her eyes. Slowly, he nodded. "All right. I'll look into it. But Maya, you need to understand something. Digging into cases like this isn't easy. There will be resistance, maybe even danger. Are you ready for that?" Maya didn't hesitate. "Yes, I have to be." As they left the cafe, an uneasy alliance began to form between them. Father and daughter, strangers bound by blood and shared purpose, stepped into the unknown together. Neither of them realized how far their search for the truth would take them, or how much it would change them both. Elijah wasted no time diving into the case. As an experienced FBI agent, he knew how to navigate the complex web of law enforcement protocols and bureaucratic red tape. But this wasn't just another investigation. It was personal. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of urgency that went beyond duty. This was about his daughter, Maya, and the man who had raised her as his own. He owed it to both of them to uncover the truth. The first step was reviewing the official police report from the night of Marcus Johnson's death. What Elijah found disturbed him. The details were sparse, almost deliberately vague. Officer Daniel Hayes' account mentioned a sudden escalation caused by General Johnson's uncooperative behavior, but bodycam footage showed no such thing. In fact, Marcus appeared calm and compliant throughout the interaction. Something didn't add up. Elijah decided to dig deeper. Using his connections within the Bureau, he requested access to additional records, internal memos, training logs for Hayes and his K-9 unit, and any prior complaints filed against the officer. What he uncovered painted a troubling picture. Hayes had been involved in 2 previous incidents where excessive force was alleged, though neither resulted in disciplinary action. Moreover, the K-9 unit assigned to him had a history of aggressive behavior during routine stops, yet no corrective measures had been taken. But Elijah's investigation didn't stop there. He began reaching out to people who had known Marcus personally, hoping to piece together a fuller understanding of the circumstances surrounding his death. One name kept coming up: Senator Robert Langston, a powerful figure with ties to military contracting firms. According to several sources, Marcus had recently testified before Congress about corruption in defense contracts, implicating Langston and others in unethical practices. Could his death have been more than just a tragic accident? As Elijah followed these leads, Maya worked tirelessly on her end, organizing protests and speaking out publicly about her father's legacy. She became the face of a growing movement demanding accountability for police misconduct. Her speeches resonated with crowds, drawing attention not only to her father's case, but also to broader issues of systemic injustice. Yet despite her outward strength, Maya struggled privately. Every interview, every rally, reopened wounds she hadn't fully healed from. Still, she pressed on, knowing her father would have expected nothing less. Meanwhile, Elijah faced resistance from unexpected quarters. His superiors at the FBI began questioning why he was devoting so much time to what they considered a local matter. "This isn't our jurisdiction," one of them warned during a tense meeting. "You're risking resources and your career on something that could blow back in your face." Elijah brushed off their concerns, but the pressure mounted. Anonymous messages started appearing in his inbox, warning him to drop the case. At first, they seemed like idle threats, but when someone slashed his car tires late one night, he realized the stakes were higher than he'd anticipated. Whoever was behind Marcus Johnson's death didn't want the truth coming out. Despite the danger, Elijah refused to back down. He arranged a covert meeting with a whistleblower, a former defense contractor who claimed to have insider knowledge about Langston's operations. The meeting took place in a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of town. The whistleblower, a nervous man named Greg, slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents linking Langston to illegal kickbacks and cover-ups involving military contracts. More importantly, there was evidence suggesting that Marcus Johnson's testimony had put a target on his back. "This goes all the way to the top," Greg whispered, glancing around nervously. "If you keep digging, they'll come after you, and anyone close to you." Elijah thanked him and left quickly, his mind racing. He now had proof that Marcus Johnson's death wasn't random. It was retaliation. But exposing the conspiracy would require careful planning and absolute trust. As he drove home, he thought about Maya. She had already lost so much. If they were going to take down the people responsible, they'd need to do it together and prepare for whatever came next. The evidence Elijah brought back from his meeting with the whistleblower was damning, but it also came with a chilling realization: they were stepping into dangerous territory. The documents pointed to powerful individuals who wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone threatening their empire. As Elijah sat in his dimly lit home office late one night, poring over the files, he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching him. Every creak of the floorboards or distant car engine outside made him tense. For the first time in his career, he felt truly vulnerable. Maya noticed the change in him when they met the next day. They had agreed to work closely together, sharing updates and strategizing their next moves. But this time, Elijah seemed distracted, almost paranoid. "What's wrong?" she asked as they sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers and coffee cups. He hesitated before answering. "I think we're being watched," he admitted finally. "Someone knows I'm looking into this. My car tires were slashed last night, and I've been getting strange messages online." Maya's heart sank. She had expected resistance, but not like this. Still, she refused to let fear dictate her actions. "Then we have to be smarter," she said firmly. "We can't stop now, not when we're so close." Elijah nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. He handed her copies of the documents Greg had provided. As Maya flipped through them, her anger grew. There were emails detailing bribes, forged contracts, and even veiled threats against whistleblowers. One memo specifically mentioned Marcus Johnson by name, labeling him as a high-priority risk after his congressional testimony. It was clear that his death wasn't just about silencing him. It was a message to others who might dare speak out. Despite the mounting pressure, father and daughter found strength in each other. Their bond, once fragile and uncertain, began to solidify as they worked side by side. Maya admired Elijah's determination, while he marveled at her courage. Together, they devised a plan to expose the conspiracy without putting themselves directly in harm's way. Their strategy involved leaking key pieces of information to trusted journalists and civil rights organizations. Elijah reached out to an old colleague, Sarah Klein, an investigative reporter known for her fearless pursuit of justice. Over encrypted calls, he shared enough details to pique her interest without revealing everything. Meanwhile, Maya continued organizing protests, using her platform to keep public attention focused on her father's case. But the closer they got to exposing the truth, the more intense the pushback became. One evening, as Maya returned home from a rally, she found her front door slightly ajar. Her stomach churned as she stepped inside, calling out cautiously. Nothing appeared to be missing, but a single envelope lay on her dining table. Inside was a photograph of her speaking at a protest, circled in red ink, along with a note, "Stop digging." Shaken, Maya called Elijah immediately. When he arrived, his face was grim. "This is serious," he said, examining the photo. "They're sending a message. We need to rethink our approach." Though terrified, Maya refused to back down. "If we stop now, they win," she insisted. "Dad taught me to stand up for what's right. No matter how hard it gets, I won't let them erase his legacy." Elijah looked at her, pride mingling with worry in his expression. "You remind me so much of your mother," he murmured. Then, more firmly, "All right, let's finish this. But carefully. We'll use every resource I have, every contact, to make sure the truth comes out safely." Over the next few days, they tightened their operation. Elijah secured secure locations for storing evidence, while Maya coordinated with allies to ensure her safety during public appearances. They knew the road ahead would be perilous, but neither was willing to give up. Each step forward brought them closer to justice, and closer to confronting the shadowy figures determined to bury the truth forever. As they prepared for the final phase of their plan, Maya and Elijah shared a quiet moment. Despite the chaos swirling around them, they found solace in their newfound partnership. For the first time, Maya felt like she truly understood what family meant, not just blood, but the unbreakable ties forged through shared struggles and unwavering support. The final phase of their plan was both thrilling and terrifying. Elijah and Maya had gathered enough evidence to expose the conspiracy, but they knew releasing it all at once could backfire. Powerful people were involved: senators, corporate executives, and high-ranking law enforcement officials. And they wouldn't go down without a fight. Every move had to be calculated, every detail double-checked. One misstep could cost them everything. Elijah decided to break the story in stages, carefully leaking pieces of information to trusted journalists like Sarah Klein. The first wave of revelations focused on Senator Robert Langston's ties to corrupt defense contractors. Documents showed how millions of taxpayer dollars had been funneled into offshore accounts controlled by Langston and his associates. When the story hit the headlines, it sent shockwaves through Washington. D.C. lawmakers scrambled to distance themselves from Langston, while watchdog groups called for an immediate investigation. But Elijah and Maya weren't done yet. They released a second batch of evidence, linking Langston directly to threats made against Marcus Johnson after his congressional testimony. Emails revealed that Langston had labeled General Johnson a threat and suggested ways to neutralize him. Though the language was vague, the implication was clear. Someone in Langston's inner circle had orchestrated the traffic stop that led to Marcus's death. As public outrage grew, Maya became even more vocal. She gave interviews, wrote op-eds, and spoke at rallies, demanding accountability not just for her father's killers, but for everyone complicit in the corruption. Her words resonated with people across the country, sparking conversations about systemic injustice and the need for reform. Yet, the attention came at a price. Anonymous messages flooded her social media accounts, some mocking her efforts, others threatening violence. Despite the fear gnawing at her, she refused to let it silence her. Meanwhile, Elijah faced professional retaliation. His superiors at the FBI summoned him to a tense meeting where they accused him of overstepping his bounds and jeopardized ongoing investigations. "You're playing a dangerous game," one of them warned. "If you don't step back now, we can't protect you." Elijah didn't flinch. "Protect me from what?" He shot back. "The truth. Because that's exactly what I'm trying to uncover." Back home, Elijah and Maya prepared for the most explosive revelation yet, proof that Officer Daniel Hayes had been manipulated into targeting Marcus Johnson. A whistleblower within the police department confirmed that Hayes had received orders to pull over anyone matching Marcus's description under false pretenses. The K-9 unit's aggression hadn't been accidental. It was part of a deliberate attempt to escalate the situation. Armed with this new information, Elijah leaked it to Sarah Klein, who published a bombshell expose detailing the entire conspiracy. The fallout was immediate. Protesters took to the streets again, chanting for justice as lawmakers called emergency sessions to address the scandal. Senator Langston denied any wrongdoing but resigned under mounting pressure. Several defense contractors implicated in the scheme were arrested, and internal investigations began within local police departments. Officer Hayes, now seen as a pawn rather than a perpetrator, cooperated fully with authorities, naming those who had given him orders. Yet even as victories piled up, Elijah and Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't over. Late one night, as they reviewed the latest developments, Elijah turned to Maya. "We've done good work," he said quietly. "But people like this, they don't disappear overnight. We'll have to stay vigilant." Maya nodded, exhaustion etched on her face. For months, she had poured every ounce of energy into fighting for her father's legacy. Now, as the dust began to settle, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about Marcus, the man who had raised her, loved her, and taught her to stand up for what was right. And she thought about Elijah, the father she never knew but who had stood by her when it mattered most. For the first time since her father's death, Maya felt a glimmer of hope. Justice wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't easy, but it was possible. Together, she and Elijah had proven that, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The final chapter of their fight for justice arrived on a crisp autumn morning, as golden sunlight filtered through the windows of a packed courtroom in Maryland. The trial of Officer Daniel Hayes and several high-ranking officials implicated in the conspiracy had drawn national attention. Reporters lined the hallways, cameras clicking incessantly, while protesters gathered outside holding signs that read "Justice for Marcus Johnson" and "No more cover-ups." For Maya and Elijah, this day represented the culmination of months of relentless effort. A chance to see accountability served. Inside the courtroom, tension hung thick in the air. Officer Hayes sat at the defendant's table, his head bowed, looking nothing like the confident figure from the body cam footage. Beside him were two former aides to Senator Langston, both accused of orchestrating the plot against Marcus Johnson. Their lawyers argued that Hayes had acted out of confusion during the traffic stop, but prosecutors countered with irrefutable evidence, emails, memos, and whistleblower testimonies proving the operation had been premeditated. Maya took the stand first, her voice steady despite the weight of emotion pressing down on her. She spoke about her father, not just as a decorated general, but as a loving parent who believed in fairness and integrity. "He dedicated his life to serving others," she said, her eyes meeting those of the jury, "and he deserved better than what happened to him. This isn't just about one man. It's about ensuring no family has to endure what mine has gone through." Elijah followed, presenting the painstakingly gathered evidence. His years of experience as an FBI agent lent credibility to his testimony, and his calm demeanor commanded respect. He walked the court through each piece of documentation, connecting the dots between Langston's corruption, the orders given to Hayes, and the tragic outcome. By the time he finished, there was no doubt in anyone's mind. Marcus Johnson's death had been orchestrated by powerful forces unwilling to let him expose their crimes. After weeks of deliberation, the verdict came down. Officer Hayes was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to prison, though many viewed him as a scapegoat rather than the mastermind. The aides to Senator Langston received harsher sentences, along with hefty fines, while investigations into other co-conspirators continued. Though Langston himself avoided criminal charges due to lack of direct evidence, his political career was over and public trust in him was shattered. For Maya, the verdict brought a mix of relief and sorrow. No sentence could bring her father back, but knowing that those responsible had been held accountable gave her some measure of peace. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by supporters and activists, she delivered a heartfelt speech. "My father always told me that standing up for what's right is never easy, but it's necessary," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Today, we've taken a step toward justice, not just for him, but for everyone who believes in a fairer world." Elijah stood nearby, watching her with pride. Over the past months, they had grown closer, their shared mission forging a bond neither had expected. After the crowd dispersed, he approached her. "You did good, Maya," he said softly. "Your father would be proud." She smiled faintly, tears glistening in her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you." In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Maya returned to organizing protests, channeling her grief into advocacy work aimed at reforming policing practices. Elijah resumed his duties at the FBI, though he remained vigilant, aware that power often resists change. They stayed in touch, building a relationship rooted in mutual respect and understanding. Though scars remained, Maya found solace in honoring her father's legacy. She started a foundation in his name, focused on supporting families affected by police violence and promoting transparency in law enforcement. It was her way of ensuring that Marcus Johnson's memory lived on, not as a victim, but as a catalyst for change. As winter approached, Maya visited her father's grave, placing fresh flowers beside his headstone. "We did it, Dad," she whispered, kneeling in the quiet stillness. "It wasn't easy, but we didn't give up. I hope you're proud." Standing nearby, Elijah watched silently, giving her space to say goodbye. In that moment, they both understood that while the road ahead would always hold challenges, they had faced them together and emerged stronger because of it.